Okay, it says we're live. So welcome everyone to StriderTalk. This is Matt C.
This is John M.
And this is episode 2. We're talking about conventions. We're talking about Cape stories. We're talking about our future plans in the immediate future with tabling at particular things and kind of walking the beat, I guess, trying to not just tell stories, but let people know that we're telling stories and get people interested in them. So that's kind of what we're trying to document in particular for this episode. So how you been doing, John?
I've been all right. I just realized I have some glare with my glasses here.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for Evil Expo. It's coming up this Friday. Is the first day of it. We're gonna go to Piscataway, New Jersey, and celebrate Villain Punk, as it's being called by the convention runner Jeff Mock. And I'm hype about it because I feel like it's a cool way of like most of the conventions I've been to before are comic book conventions, right? So recently my sister took me to Confluence, which is a PA convention that's around sci-fi and fantasy. And so it was cool to see that there were people that were like celebrating, like it wasn't just like a comics convention or like I think most people that go to like San Diego Comic Con, it's kind of been taken over by like TV and movies over there. But like with this one, it was all kind of like they had, fine art that was fantasy related. They had like masquerades. So like not only was it like a costume contest, but like people would go up and like perform like little monologues as the character that they were dressed as. And they were like they call them like cafe clashes, where it's like you sit down and it's just like you and maybe 6 other people at a table, and you would just kind of talk about sci-fi and fantasy stuff. And there would be a few like authors there, but that was like it wasn't like they were running the discussion. It was just kind of like just hanging out and like drinking coffee, or some of them were like beer or whatever. So I'm excited to go to another convention that's just kind of generally sci-fi fantasy related. And this one is interesting to me because I'm writing like modern gothic kind of like like the anti-heroes. So I'll be interested to see how people take to my brand, and I'm going to be talking about Strider as well. Which, to let people know, I got a lot of the merchandise up that I was going to have on its own website, but we transitioned now to an Etsy store. So I can share my screen real quick.
Yeah.
Let's see. Boop-a-doo. Oh, wait. Let's see here. There we go. And share this.
Okay.
So I have a bunch of
cool.
So this is going to be available at the show. I have a print of that, a canvas print, and my friend Jason, who did this little like kaiju illustration, is going to be there, taking commissions and whatnot. My sister Melissa just before, well, I recently told Matt that she had I believe I told the stream that my sister Melissa Matos, she just got a book deal offered to her. Before that, she had a short story called The Iron Sorcerer got picked up, and so she has this dragon mug here that she's going to be soliciting for. I don't know if she's going to have coffee there, but I don't know if she's going to actually have physical things. But she's promoting this mug, and she has like a Filk album that she's going to be promoting. and that we just posted that yesterday. Um, so it's all like music. It's all like fantasy songs about dragons. Um,
Beautiful.
so she's promoting like that as like her like anti-hero brand. She's just gonna be like talking to people about dragons. Um, and as you can see, there's some of Matt's art here as well. We have a KYRIE mug, and we have the Triumph beach towel here. And I'm most excited actually about this because I love the leggings that have like really intricate like most recently like they've had like cosmic designs
Mm-hmm.
on leggings, but I really like the kind of like foliage of this Gawain thing that you have. Um, and so I'm
Yeah.
excited. Like excited for all this to kind of be our premiere um, merchandise that we have, and I'm excited to get more stuff up here. So
Yeah, it's gonna be wonderful.
yeah,
So, are you guys are you giving a talk at all or anything like that, or?
yeah. I'm actually gonna find out tonight
Hmm.
what like in terms of like there are two panels that I know that I'm gonna be doing. One is like kind of about branding and about like the idea of branding a villainous character. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one is going to be the bad boys of YA. That my sister and I are going to be talking about.
Oh, cool.
Um, but I might actually be on more panels. I'm going to find out tonight, like if I'm going to be inserted into other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that was mainly like what inspired me to want to go to Evo Expo was because I enjoyed Confluence so much and being able to talk about like all these different tropes and things and like trends in literature and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to. Evo Expo was like, oh great, there's a thing all about like goth culture, and so
Yeah.
that was what intrigued me about it in the first place. Um,
Yeah. Do you think that table? Okay, so you're tabling and you're also presenting
mhm,
on some things, and I have a theory that when you get to give a talk, that it makes it much easier for people to come up to you when you table. What
mm.
do you think about that? Do you is that does that ring true in your experience or?
So the one example that I can that I did was I worked on a comics anthology, and so I had gone to Wizard World Philadelphia,
Hmm.
um, and done. I did like a talk about like going from writing comics to finishing my first novel,
Hmm.
and so it was about the differences between genre fiction and literary fiction.
Yeah.
Um, but then I think what actually happened was because I wasn't really trained on like it wasn't really I hadn't really had as much experience with like public speaking.
Hmm.
I don't know that there was necessarily any like there were people that like came up after the talk and like appreciated the talk, and I was surprised that even I got that much like kind of buzz
Nice.
from that. Um, but it wasn't necessarily a straight like I didn't know how to position the talk as like, oh, if you're interested, come to my table, or I
Yeah.
didn't like set it up as like a one-to-one thing of like it would make sense. So I think with the talk that I'm going to be doing, especially having had more experience going to
Hmm.
different conventions and knowing a little bit more about it, I feel like I'm a lot more comfortable about like making it seem so like uh informal and so like I want to be welcoming to the point where like they want to come to the table after and talk more about something or
Sure.
like it'll let them know like because I feel like a lot of people have the pressure if they're going to give a talk to make it like a lecture or to make it like this comprehensive analysis like
Yeah.
especially if you're coming from more you know hard sci-fi or hard like historical fiction or something
Hmm.
you can feel pressured to make it like a poster presentation or something.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I was coming from. But now I kind of know that like they're there to have fun. They're not really there to get every bit of it. Like you don't want to write a book as you're talking, kind of thing. You don't
That's a
want to
great
be
point.
that narrowed, drilled down. So you just kind of want to highlight some major points and then say like, this is what I am. And especially one thing I liked about Confluence was it wasn't just a lecture and then, come to my booth. It was more like we're both involved in a conversation. And there were a lot of
Mm.
people in the audience actually that interacted with the people talking. It wasn't just a one-way street.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that because it showed me like, oh, you're not supposed to be like a god up there on the dais, and then
Mm.
like people are interested in coming to worship you more. It's more just like I'm a fan just like you. Here's my 2 cents, and
Yeah.
if you want to see me more about me and what I do, I'm at this I'm at this booth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tend to think. So here's my guess, having never done this before. I'm presenting at my first kind of convention in a month,
Oh, cool.
and I'm also tabling for the first time there too. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
a little intimidated by it, or I was, until I thought about how much of an advantage that the audience has over you when they first get to hear you kind of speak your mind and kind of share your thoughts, and
Mm-hmm.
generally kind of demonstrate that you're not a sociopath, that you're kind of a normal guy, you're approachable, they like some of your opinions, they like some of the things that you had to say. And now they, being strangers, like they're strangers to you, but they have kind of the upper hand where now they have a sense of who you are and where you're coming from. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that gives them it gives me, when I'm in the audience, greater confidence to ask questions, and also to kind of find them afterwards and talk to them at their table. Because I think it genuinely is. This is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is that there's a lot of barriers to making that kind of transaction between creator and consumer at a
Mm-hmm.
at a tabling convention. And I think there's many ways to say it, but I think a lot of times it just boils down to it's two strangers, and one person is just kind of standing there behind we're sitting behind a table, and
Uh,
it feels a little predatory, and it's like and this guy's they're looking at me, but they don't want to make it clear that they're looking at me, and they want me to buy something. I'm just not even going to bother. But if you already get a sense, you get to see them talk for 30 minutes, you know,
mm,
and you've already got, maybe you asked a question or you saw someone else ask the question, you got to see them kind of respond to it. It's already been kind of um, you've already seen it demonstrated, I guess, how they
mm-hmm.
communicate, and you already feel comfortable with that. And and then now you have that upper hand again to kind of go up and say hi and introduce yourself. They don't know who you are, but you feel a little connected to them, so
Right.
which is a nice kind of gift to give to people, I think. Say
Yeah.
like, all you guys, you get to be the stranger who knows me more than I know you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a dying to yourself thing or something.
Mm.
But
Well, actually, that's a great point. That's to what I was just thinking about as you were talking. That like you can feel predatory in like if you're going there and you have a mindset and you can kind of be super intellectual or super pragmatic about it. And I feel like that's something that like it's a continuum that you could think you have one choice or the other about. Where like okay, so you go in and you think this is my opportunity to self actualize. So I'm gonna go there, and this is like I've arrived. I'm a person at a convention. I'm one
yeah,
of those people that I saw on the other side
yep,
of the table, and so that to me that puts you in the wrong mindset because you're like you don't have anything to do at that point because you're done. Like just having a
ah,
table means that
interesting,
you've won. But then you could also go the other route where if you're super pragmatic about it and you're like, I'm here just as a salesman, then that person then that puts it on the customer, and then the customer feels all the pressure because they feel like I'm not helping this person unless I buy something. And
yeah,
so what's
yeah,
funny is that you would assume at that point that it would work because they would buy something. But normally what that does is that puts so much pressure on them that they don't buy anything because they feel like, well, it would be disingenuous to walk up to the table unless I'm going to buy something. So rather than be disingenuous, I'm not going to walk anywhere near the artist alley booths, and that's also not what you want. So I think
Yeah.
you hit the nail on the head in the terms of like doing a talk makes it a little bit easier because then they realize that you're human and that
Hmm.
I'm gonna kind of talk about this in terms of my branding at the Evo Expo talk that I'm gonna do,
Hmm.
where like realizing that art wasn't my self actualization helped me to see that I'm actually serving people by
Mm.
making art. And so if I just
Mm.
express like, okay, here's what I've done, here's who I am, but that's not really what I care about the most. Like I actually care about you more than my art.
Mm.
Then like they realize that, oh, he's not gonna hate me if I don't buy something, and he's not gonna hate me if he doesn't come off as some like god man. Then
Yeah.
you can kind of show that like the art's purpose is actually to serve people as opposed to being some like artifact of great import or just being a transaction. Um, and so yeah, so I think once I realized that um, yeah, that art is a means of serving other people, I can just go there and be, like Christ in that sense. So you're saying like
Mm.
emptying yourself. You you're just a channel by which good art gets out into the public. And so you're not necessarily like you're not as stressed about like, oh, I'm gonna make a mistake and you know, I'm not gonna be that idealistic artist that I always looked up to
Yeah.
because you
Because that's
start
the
realizing,
instinct. Yeah.
yeah, you're
For
like that
sure.
person doesn't really exist. It was just, like this image out of the Spiritus Mundi that like
Mm.
got like stuck in my craw.
Yeah. Matt Reese in the chat just said, "You've inspired him. He just had an epiphany about a panel topic."
Oh, awesome!
Yeah.
See, that's what happens
Yep.
if you get out of your own way a little bit
Yeah.
and you help people. That's like, isn't that what we all want?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like it's interesting. Uh, Realizing that the instinct is you focused on so many things, right, in life,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly in uh, participating, being asked to participate in a convention,
Mm-hmm.
and in realizing through uh, hard-won experience and
Mm-hmm.
painful wisdom that it's actually you're being asked to participate in order to serve,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be, I guess, if you're leading, it's by serving. You're trying to facilitate something on behalf of the people that are there. They're not
Mm-hmm.
there for you. You're there for them, I guess. And if they're going to buy anything, it's because you're providing something to them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not
Right.
trying to get your attention by buying something.
Yeah, because even most of the sales, like I think that's one thing that changed my perspective was for
Mm,
for a while my day job was at a place called Richardson that's in the center city here in Philadelphia,
mm-hmm,
and what most of their sales books were about, like because of the internet, like everybody has access to all this information,
mm,
and so the idea that you can give this person what they want and like create a brand that just clicks with them, it's a lot harder because they have
mm,
like you can say I have the best prices and then they can just click a few buttons and find someone that has a better price than yours or whatever.
yeah.
So what their kind of formula was you should drill down. So you should make like the most custom thing
Mm,
possible, and you get that from actually talking to the consumer and like saying like, oh, okay, so you need this. What do you mean by this? And a lot of sales stuff will tell you like feigning interest in the customer actually motivates them more. Um, and I choose to believe as like an optimist that
yeah.
rather than like being a fake with your customers. Like they want to feel like you are not a predator, that you're not there just for their money.
Yeah.
And so when they come to your booth, just like ask them, how's the convention going? Did you find anything cool? And be
Mm,
genuinely interested. And then
mm,
it's a way of communicating, not faking. It's a way of communicating. I'm not here just to take something from you. I'm
yeah.
here to like give you something maybe that you might think is cool. And to me, like that was what always excited me about conventions. Even if I didn't buy anything, it was always just cool to go to a place where everybody there was as excited as me about a thing. Like I'm surrounded by people that all like comics. Um, so that was what made it fun, regardless of whether like I found the perfect collectible or whatever. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's what I want to share with people coming to a panel that I'm in, or a booth that I happen to own. Like I
Mm,
want them to feel like they're enjoying you know the invention, and that they're getting something out of it, even if that's like buying something that I'm there to sell is not part of that transaction.
yeah. Yeah, which is tough. And I guess you gotta, um, one of the other things I've thought about is, um, so I visited my brother-in-law who's a missionary in London
Hmm.
a few months ago, and so he'll set up like a booth like once a week. He's primarily a missionary to the Muslim Bangladeshi Sylheti community
Oh,
there,
okay.
and so he'll set up some stuff. And I guess this is tricky, but I saw that it worked, but it's probably not genuine enough that if I just kind of like, instead of standing on the same side with him, if I just kind of stand like a curious potential customer, I guess, kind of looking at books and things on the other
Uh-huh.
side, that gives, I become a shield, I guess. And other
Mm.
people kind of feel like, well, it's safe. That guy's standing there. So I'll just come in and kind of peek behind him. And then
Mm.
he kind of got more people talking in the way. And it got me thinking on more mundane levels. Like,
Mm.
that's kind of a, like, panel, I'd say like tables that have zero people in front of them are much more likely to always have zero people in front of them
Mm.
than one, and one that has one person in front of them is much more
Mm.
likely to have two and three, stuff like that.
Right. And
It
we're
makes
actually
sense.
going to avoid that. My sister came up with an awesome idea where, um, well, first of all, it was so funny because she was like trying to get the music stuff together and try to
Hmm.
decide, like, and she was also working on the novel that she was working on. So she had a lot of different pieces that she was putting together. But then all of a sudden she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna make coffee and sell coffee." It's like, "Oh, okay, I guess you can do
Nice.
that." But then um, I don't know if that's gonna actually be part of it now, because she was trying to roast the beans that she got
Yeah.
without a roaster, and it didn't go so well. So we'll see what we have.
Oh no.
But the idea that she had, just in general, I really liked, and is gonna still work. Where rather than, because we got, they were gracious enough to give us a 10 by 10 um, area, and so initially, just having the booth, I expected we would just sit behind the booth and be like a lemonade stand type setup, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then, lo and behold, with this bigger space, Melissa was like, "Oh, maybe we can just like set up a little area where people can sit."
Mm,
And I was like, "Oh, well, that's kind of cool," because rather than feeling like, we're staring at them in the aisle and like, buy something, buy something, um,
mhm.
it'll be more like, "Oh, this is like an area where people can stop and like talk to us, and we can just talk about the convention and talk about what we have and everything." And like you're saying, like there are those little things of like, there are so many different things that like you're thinking, oh, they'll probably expect this, or
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, if they see, okay, one person's at that booth and they're not dead, so maybe it's safe to
Yeah,
go to that booth, then it's just you're trying to fight the expectations of normal convention, you know, and I feel like there's different types of things. Like I've gone to comic conventions, and I've gone to some recently that were like more like book festivals. Like
sure.
there's a book sales area, there's little like workshops and things. Um, but it seems like every convention kind of has its own vibe, and so you're kind of trying to stand out in some ways, but also not seem like you're saying like predatory in other ways.
Yeah.
Um, and that's so. In terms of going to conventions, what's your history about like attending different things, like whether it be like a workshop someone's doing or something as big as like a full convention?
Let's see. My first convention was in 2010, I think it was, and it was Star Wars Celebration in Orlando.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
went
Do
with
tell.
one of my favorite friends, and
Hmm.
yes, I did dress up as a Jedi. And I guess I don't
All
know. It
right.
was like it was soon after graduating from college,
Uh,
which when you graduate from art school, I don't know. There's like residual nerddom that you kind of have to get out of your system. You're like, I should go ahead and do this.
okay. So that
So
sounds good to me.
yeah. So that was fun, and I mean that's more of a merchandise, uh, probably closer to what San Diego is, I guess,
Hmm.
in terms of there's tons of very expensive and people coming from all over to as vendors primarily.
Hmm.
Uh, there's an artist alley, but it's very secondary, and the big features are the corporate showcase, like see the first trailer here kind of event,
Right.
or see this actor who was in one of these movies. So um,
And it's
that's
funny because it seems like there have been some flagship conventions, like a San Diego Comic Con,
mhm.
or say like Disney's, like D23, I guess, or
Hmm.
what was oh yeah E3 for video games.
Mhm.
Like it seems like those have just become like almost like press events because they'll
Hmm.
be like big launches for something, and then more of like the smaller conventions. Like if there's like if your town has like a Star Wars like convention, it's probably nothing like that convention.
Hmm.
And that like you'll have more like people reselling merchandise and you know um like fan art and stuff like that. I just feel like that's like Wizard World Philadelphia actually was more like there were times when like comic creators and stuff like from Marvel and DC would come and like they'd be in like Artist Alley and they'd be doing like panels and stuff.
Mhm.
But somewhere it felt like it switched where all of a sudden like you could see like the guy that played Winter Soldier in the Captain America movie, and you get like all these big actors. Like one year it was like Thor, Stan Lee, and somebody else that was like a major celebrity, but
Wow.
like none of the actual creators were coming anymore, and it was like a weird
Hmm.
switch because it didn't seem I wouldn't have expected like celebrity like autographs and pictures to be the major pull.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like that switched. Anyway, I just felt like it's important for people that like are going to conventions to realize that maybe the convention in their town is not the same
Hmm.
experience as other conventions, and that's was the switch to me with Confluence was, oh, this is actually like a fan centric convention versus something that's
Yeah.
like about meeting a celebrity or just like you're saying like merchandise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually the last convention I went to was it's been 4-ish years now, and
Mhm.
it was put on by a library association, so it was pretty small and it was newish, and they pulled people from all over the Southeast, and
Oh wow.
they got primarily it was interesting. The artist for Squirrel Girl, for Marvel's Squirrel Girl, I forgot her
Oh.
name. She was there. It was just doing its second #1, which, funnily, I guess, Marvel was doing a lot of shenanigans at the time, and I think it had only been running for a couple of years, and they were already
I guess we'll talk about that soon.
Yeah, yeah. But she was there, and I totally just like hung out. Like I hung out probably too long at her table, and like bought a poster and asked her about art supplies and stuff like this. And there were writers on X-Men. What was it? X-Men '94 or something? '93. It was like a '90s reboot thing.
Right. Yeah. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. So one of the writers for that was there. Chatted with him, and then like an indie comic creator guy, well, he's not really indie. I mean, he works for Oni Press. Chris Schweitzer was there. That's why I went. I drove 2 hours to see this guy. He's incredible, and almost I was one of the only people there, honestly, in the Artist Alley area. And they were all giving presentations. They all rotated through in an auditorium type area, and you would go over. This was, I mean, keep in mind, this is 2015 or 16. Well, I guess I don't know how relevant that is. I guess I just imagine it's probably even worse now with conventions. But hardly anyone was going in there to listen to these people. So they get like 20 people in a mostly empty auditorium, and some of those people were the people who are waiting to go next. It's really sad. But the merch alley, this was in the height of Loot Crate and Mystery Box type things.
Okay.
People would throw down $50 for, for some contents of which they did not know beforehand, but they would buy it because there's a 1 in 5 chance that there's a, Nintendo Switch or something in there. And so people were going nuts for like vintage toys, Transformers memorabilia, all that kind of stuff. The merch alley was hopping, and I'm sure they made their money back just on if you were selling vintage nerddom ephemera. Those people were set, but I felt so bad for the artists in Artist Alley. Because they were the real sales. They were the headliners. But, I mean, that just goes to show what the disconnect is. And, I mean, this kind of segues a bit, but I think it's interesting. Like, I don't tend to... I don't think that the customer is wrong very often. And this goes with how they're approaching, how the customer's tastes are changing, how it's different customers attending these conventions. And if they primarily just are there to buy to complete their G.I. Joe set, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think if people they think that a comic convention, I guess comics are just a catch-all. It's another way of saying nerd culture now, almost in a way, so that a comic convention, in effect, is a nerddom culture convention. And, nerds by definition, I guess, at least as far as the corporate structures figured things out, nerds by definition buy a lot of merchandise. That's how they express their interest in a
well, I think it gets into something that like I think is interesting about like this show, this like this like discussion that we found here, where there are certain things about geek culture that I love and hate at the same time.
Sure.
And I feel like that there's a part of it that is about like the trends changing. So I think one of those things is that, like, to me, being a comic book fan, going to a comic book convention, like, I was excited to see my favorite writers and artists actually like traveling to my town, and I could like see them in person. And like, I remember asking Joe Quesada of Marvel to like, I remember asking like, it was just a regular Q&A thing, and I was like, when is Spider-Man gonna be out of the Avengers and go back to fighting like B and C list supervillains? And he thought it was funny.
Nice.
But he was like, read the next issue. And I read the next issue, and it was like, that was when Spider Man revealed his secret identity. And so that was his way of saying, it's never going to be the same again. Sorry, kid. Um,
Yeah.
but, but like, just being able to have that face to face experience with like the editor in chief of my favorite comic book company, like that was a cool thing that like I didn't see that being something that was like in any other entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like in one sense I agree with you in that like I'm not gonna tell a Generation Z kid that they're reading things wrong or that they're
Yeah.
being a fan wrong. But at the same time, what I think is interesting is now that like 50% of the movie marketplace and the publishing marketplace and like TV marketplace is opening up because of the internet. What's interesting is that now, like, because of things like Comicsgate and a lot of controversies around different, like, there's this mindset around, like, okay, there's, like you were saying about Oni Press. Are they indie? Well, they're not the big three comics publishers, so
Yeah.
technically they're independent. But what that to me really means is, okay, if there's a company willing to live like just on like soup to nuts, like they're willing to not like try to make like millions and millions of dollars off their product. They're just like willing to do the business that will pay the bills. You can actually have some of those niche communities or some of those readers still satisfied that are looking for a certain type of comic book, a certain type of novel, and
Hmm.
like I it feels like there's two shifts happening. There's a shift around like if you want to get a literary advice topics about the arts, or if you want to get some actual like interaction with an artist, you have to go out of your way to like travel and see that person, because the general public, BookCon just has people like John Cena there to talk about their new
Hmm.
memoir or whatever.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you can just log on to Amazon the day that a book is available and get that, and it's not actually that difficult to get to the art itself.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a weird disconnect, because part of me rages against that machine of like,
Yeah.
well, most books are not going to be about the human soul and its many like deficiencies, but at the same time, like I can probably find literary fiction now in a way that you could not in the 90s. And like, like you don't have to um subsist on what the publishing industry just tells you to buy.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, as far
Yeah.
as if we could just limit it, I pushed
Hmm.
beyond my means, but to keep it to comics, I grew up with my reading education was like when I was 10, I was reading like Shakespeare and the Bible. That was like the two things that I liked the most. And then what was funny was that when I was in the hospital at 11, I realized like people just started giving me comics, just assuming that a nerdy kid with glasses and braces would enjoy that stuff.
Hmm.
But turns out I did. And what I liked
Hmm.
about Marvel was they were characters who had like fatal flaws. So like
Hmm.
Tony Stark is a billionaire, but he has a drinking problem, and he's got a lot of like hubris. And like Batman is, a billionaire who's super smart, but he's also like a bit of a sociopath who can't have a family. Um, and like there were all these characters that I really glommed onto that
Yeah. Sure.
I could just buy a comic, and I knew kind of in the same way that you have all these like archetypal characters in mythology and in Shakespeare and things like that. I could rely on the comics to have those. Like one of my favorite things is like Daredevil versus the Punisher. It's basically capital punishment versus like a lawyer who you know is like
Mhm.
fighting for the system and like you know due process and everything like that. So that was my reading education. Now it seems like the publishing industry has been like, okay, so comics are really for all ages and teenagers, and the it seems to me
Mm.
like the resolution has shifted, and so there are some books like The Walking Dead or like with anything like other things within indie publishing. Like I got your comic. I am looking forward to Coronary coming out this
Yeah.
summer.
I got
Um,
the first coronary. It was very good.
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
um, like that is fulfilling my needs in terms of like as an adult reader. So
Hmm.
like it's funny because I'm advocating for comics and like I'm arguing basically on the net positive side for them. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like I feel like I've outgrown what Marvel and DC are publishing now. So give me a little bit of what your attitude is towards comics and how you started reading them and what you think about them now.
Well, hmm. This will be interesting if Matt Reese is still. He said he's coming in and out, but if he's still listening, he'll be interested to hear. Um, I mean, I largely kind of told him what I thought last Thursday on his show, but
Oh,
I
cool.
think no, it's good to talk about it. I guess like I got into comics because I had European friends, and then I lived for a bit overseas, where
Okay.
everyone was reading comics the way most people read comics, which is they're not reading superhero content. They're reading just all the same kind of genres that you read in young adult fiction or
Okay.
adult fiction. Adventure stuff, mystery, thriller, romance, day in the life, autobiography, all that
Right. Right.
stuff. Plus comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes,
Hmm.
Garfield type stuff. Everyone was reading that, of course. And
Gotcha.
uh, and then coming kind of growing up some more in the States and not being impressed with the peculiarities of something that doesn't naturally draw in people very well unless they're already interested in
Hmm.
unless they're attracted to complicated runs and timelines. Like I'd never even heard of what a run is until like 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh.
Uh,
Hmm.
like
Right.
this the concept that these things are constantly rebooted by different people with different perspectives, but it's the same characters
Hmm.
and timelines overlap and get retconned and all this stuff. Like that has to excite you to even not to overcome the I think pretty natural um, instinct to just have an aversion to that sort of format
Hmm.
for telling
Right. Right.
stories, where it's like it's mostly the same characters since 1967, but it's been retold and retold so many times. That does not excite me. So
Right. Right.
and so there's a lot of like I guess like accretions to that you can't really, because the genre superheroes only are popular in one country and for about 2 generations because it's already
Hmm.
died off with the younger kids
Right.
who are finding, are discovering the global market as it's entering our marketplace and finding, what I found in the 90s, thankfully, that there's nothing particularly superhero-y about comics. It can be, you can have a comic and tell any kind of story, just like you can write a novel and tell any kind of story.
Right.
So,
I
even,
think that's something that was demystified to me
hmm,
early enough where I could understand that choosing to like superhero comics was like being a part of this kind of weird club where like everybody pretends like everybody cares about Superman, but then when you get like down to the nitty gritty, like nobody's reading the Superman comic. It's just we all kind of pretend like, oh, he's the symbol of America. So,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing because,
Hmm.
like, I I personally liked the idea, like, okay, so I'm basically jumping into a mythology that has been around since the 60s,
Yeah.
and because, like, for example, there was things like Ultimate Spider-Man that came out when I was in high school. That was kind of a reboot that I jumped onto, and I really resonated with Brian Michael Bendis's writing, and
Sure.
so the idea that this is this guy's take on this character, excuse me, was just something that, like, oh, okay, so this is, I can basically start here and not feel like I'm missing out on anything. And like I showed you the other day, like the J. Michael Straczynski run on Spider-Man, like, there's a core, there's like this core character, and there's the values, like, with great power comes great responsibility, that you can always assume, like, that's this what this character stands for. But I'm kind of
Yeah.
unique in the sense that, like, I attributed that to, like, a mythological reading of that thing, where it was like it was basically this person's adding to this lore. And I think eventually what I didn't like was that it felt like I wasn't finding enough writers who were really adding their voice to the characters. It just seemed more like what you're saying, where, like,
Hmm.
you're basically cannibalizing your own audience. Like, you're caring more about the whims of people that don't really care about comics. And
Hmm.
it was more like, as much as I wasn't really in the weeds of, like, the more political things about Comicsgate, or the um the uh the culture war aspect of it.
Hmm.
It more to me more it was like, okay, comics doesn't care about making the 30-year-old man who grew up with Spider-Man happy anymore. They're just shifting to the where the business is. Um, then it started to be this thing of, like, they're not really building on what I grew up reading anymore. So I'm gonna find comics that are, and it was also like me getting more invested in the novel, or like even like
Yeah.
with even like with shows that were becoming more like novels, like Breaking Bad, where, like, you have this self-contained story, or like Lost, I
Yeah.
got really into, like, just this idea of, like, oh, I don't need to be a part of this little club where everybody kind of cares about what, Batman is, or what Spider-Man is, or, like, it just
Yeah.
seemed like a natural thing, like, as an adult, that I would start gravitating more towards, like, pieces of art that speak for themselves. um
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
I think that, like, to me it didn't seem like, oh, okay, I'm joining this, like, with Comicsgate becoming like this partisan thing. I didn't really feel like it would benefit me to become part of a movement per se.
Hmm.
But I also feel like, as an artist, like, I kind of I feel like the Lorax, like, I want to speak for the trees. Like,
Yeah.
I know what it's like, what the people my age feel about Comicsgate, because they're like, you're trying to make comics about things other than the content. Um, but then again, like,
Yeah.
I don't feel so passionate about it that, like, I like, it's not part of my identity anymore. I
Yeah.
just happen to, like, I'll revisit these comics every now and again, and they
Hmm.
they mean something to me, like, as far as, like, nostalgia goes, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that type of thing.
And like I don't mean to bash on superhero stuff. I just find whatever is appealing. This would go for any genre, rightfully so.
Uh,
Whatever is appealing about the sort of stories being told in that genre are its ability to resonate on a very deep human level. That's trans genre, I guess, trans medium. Um, like I would argue, uh, everything I've ever seen from a 1930s comic has heroic archetypes at play,
mm,
um, and Superman just being one of many. Nothing particularly distinguishing, even other than his visual characteristics.
Right.
And investing the mythic into comics helped comics be successful. Not because comics are particular. I mean, what's the heroic archetypical aspects involved in like Harley Quinn or something? One of the most successful cosplayed characters that you're going to see on the convention floor in a couple weeks. I mean, a lot of it, it's just not. I don't know. I don't think it's tenable. When it's at its best, it's doing things that you can do in any genre.
Right. And I think really like my specific glomming onto it's around a very kind of like esoteric reading where it's basically putting onto it this idea that like what they represented to me were people that were basically demigods. Like there's this idea like they have each one of these characters has a lot of like personal potential, and there's this idea, at least like in the Marvel comics thing, where Stan Lee basically decided like, okay, we've had this golden age, and where everybody's like this perfect character, and there was this time when basically the idea was like, okay, I can either quit and start writing novels, or I can write superhero comics the way that I've wanted to for the past like 20 years. And it was like, what are they going to do? Fire you? So you might as well do what you want to do. And then that's when there was this boom of like, okay, the Fantastic Four are heroes, but they all kind of hate each other. And it resonated with me, the idea that like,
it's a great idea.
There was this idea that like even these very powerful characters have these like flaws, and I feel like personally, like being a person of faith, there was this idea that like there's a lot of people that are of certain, like, you can think whatever group you assign yourself to, there's this idea that like, well, I want my group to win, whether that's like I want my family to be okay, or I want like my faith to be like defended or whatever. But there's this idea like with, for example, like the X-Men, where like they're hated and feared by the public, but Charles Xavier tells them all like, we need to do this in such a way that's peaceful, and like we don't want to validate their fear of us.
No, of course. Like every like there's been some really powerful and culture changing topics that superhero comics have tackled pretty successfully, for sure. And I don't discount that. Honestly, like I almost want to, I wish I hadn't stirred the pot as much, because being more libertarian minded, like I tend to just, I don't see a lot of opinions, especially in the realm of this sort of stuff, just like aesthetic preferences, like in terms of right and wrong. Now I just think in terms of like, well, is it useful for society for people to be obsessed with superheroes, or is it not useful?
Right.
Like me not being obsessed and never having been, and probably never will be obsessed with superheroes. Like I'm finding my own, like it's because I'm finding like a mythic substructure that I'm finding in other genres that are satisfying that. But other people seem to be they're finding that mythic substructure in this superhero content. So, it's like more power to them. I liked Enter the Spider-Verse. That was a fantastic movie. That was better than almost every Marvel movie I've seen. But yeah,
I was watching. No, I completely agree with you, because that usually, like entering these types of discussions, to me it becomes deadly if the other person thinks like, well, I need to make sure this person thinks like I do by the end of this. Like, I'm under no persuasion, but it is fun for me to keep poking the bear, because I do like to. Arguing is just one of my fun things. Thankfully, I've done a little bit less with my sister recently. That kind of gets me in trouble. But
Yeah.
I will say though, I feel like you would enjoy the. There are two storylines that they incorporated. How many of the Marvel movies have you seen?
Oh, like two thirds, I guess.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I was gonna say like I was just really appreciating the. I really like how um the Winter Soldier and Civil War thing, like, to me those were really good adaptate. Well, first of all, they were good adaptations just of the comic stories without like just flying in the face of what like they were trying to accomplish. Like it didn't seem out of place. Like they integrated them very well into
Yeah.
what they were already trying to do. Um, but I just like it seemed it was very interesting to me that while everything else was becoming like, oh, we don't want to have like that's triggering me, or there's like
Hmm.
so like all these political faux pas that are getting people like just trashed in the media. It's so funny to me that they tackled like in the Winter Soldier like the police state and like
Oh
the
yeah.
deep state in general.
I
And
I love that's my favorite. That's probably I mean, other than Enter the Spider Verse, that's probably my favorite Marvel movie for sure. And I think that was before. I mean, when was that? Like 2013 or something.
uh-huh.
So it was before it's it felt politically like a right leaning. That's my guess, at least.
Mm,
it's it wasn't bad to bring up because people still had a living memory of the Patriot Act and
uh-huh.
Bush era kind of
Right. And
those
I
things.
thought it was even cool. Like I didn't even. This is the first time I really thought about it this way, but it was kind of interesting that they had like Nick Fury tells this story about his grandfather, and like
Mm,
he's on an elevator, and like he's basically like working for this hotel, and like the neighborhood got bad, and he had this bag with him, and the guy some guy is just like, what's in the bag, and he pulls out
mm.
this like nickel plated clock or whatever. um and so
I
he's
don't
like,
remember
it's
that. Hmm.
well, he said like, yeah, it's a very subtle scene, but he basically says like, I um my grandfather liked everyone, but he didn't trust anybody. um and so it sets up this really cool thing of like, it was an interesting thing to me because like what you're saying, like there you could there's like all these different things that you could take that like what it's talking about to mean, whether it's
Mm.
like, is it a right thing because it's basically saying like, don't give the government too much control, or is it a left leaning thing because they're trying to make like the police out to be like these controlling substructure or whatever. But
Yeah.
like it was cool to me that like by making the person who is um basically doing part of this like big deep state plot, this like black guy that's talking about how his grandfather used to be like, afraid for his life in it, whatever,
Oh
like
yeah. It was
place
so
where he
complex.
lived. Yeah, it was an interesting thing of like, oh wow, like I didn't even think about that aspect of it. Like
Yeah.
he, like it's a very deeply like it makes it more universal because it's like this is like what every American is thinking about. It doesn't matter what like political side you're on. Like everybody thinks
Yeah.
about what it would be like to be on an elevator in the middle of the night and you know be afraid for your life. So that little microcosm made it more of like, well, okay, what do you think about how you should police? Like if you had the finger on the button, what would you do? Um,
Hmm.
it was a nice way of like making that like big problem such a small like thing that you could kind of think about for yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that to me is what lights me up. Like when you can take something and like I really appreciate the ability to have like conversations about these things.
Oh
So
yeah.
to me, like making something that's so mythological and so like, you want to look up to Captain America, you want to look up to Superman, being able to make those things something where it's like you can actually relate to this character. That to me is something that comics can do that other genres don't. They don't have as much of an access to because it's not like you can make a character, but it's very difficult to make it that iconic. And that to me is something that you can certainly, like, there are different characters like Indiana Jones and stuff that have become that iconic. But I feel like it's something because it has its roots in like the early 1900s. Um, it's it's very much difficult, and it's a lot like it has much more weight when it's literally a man who calls himself America talking about like what should do and what's the right thing to do.
That's fair. Matt Reese in the chat says he would agree with that take on Superman, presuming he's talking about my take on Superman, which is very kind of him. It's very charitable.
Yes.
Superman did not begin a distinctive career, but he was built into that distinctive career. He rose to a challenge over the decades to become what he is today, which is interesting in itself, honestly. But yeah, so we're coming up on an hour. I don't.
Yes, I feel like this went a lot better than I thought it would.
Yeah. No, I think we did good. I guess we tackled our main two subjects that we wanted to tackle, and the other thing was just kind of a throwaway. So let's not do that. The stupid polls. Maybe we can do that. Those are always like an optional thing. How about that? If we feel like things need to be padded out a little bit.
Sure.
And it's a bit quieter in the chat this evening, so we don't have to bother people as much to vote for.
Well, I'm glad that Matt could join us. I saw that. Yeah. So is the matriarchy like a show that you are like a featured guest on, or are you co-hosting that regularly?
My name is Matt, but I'm an infrequent but appreciative guest. I've been on maybe 3 times, 4 times at most.
Okay.
And he's a very nice guy. Yeah, we talk a lot. I recommend you reach out to him and maybe I'm sure he'd love to have you on. He's a very smart guy. He's
awesome.
a deep thinker. You'd like him.
I would
just check it out.
I would be honored.
Yeah, that's probably backstage stuff. I should have just said that in backstage.
It's archived now for posterity.
Yeah.
He advocates for me to be on all the shows.
Yeah. So are you going so when are you going to your is it next week?
Yeah, so on this Friday, it's the 24th to the 26th. It's in Piscataway. If there's either of those people that are in the chat right now or anywhere near me and want to go to a convention about villains, this is the one to go to, Evil Expo. And I also wanted to share something else on the screen if you'll indulge me. So let me see here. I always preempt this and then I'm not ready. Okay. Haha. Yes. So, I started a light novel on Tapios, or not. Sorry, I keep thinking Tapios, but it's maybe because tapioca pudding. Who knows? But it's tapas.io, and they're a site where you can publish comics or light novel series. So I started this. It's tapas.io/White Devil, and the little excuse me, the uh, the short elevator pitch is Ned and his dog Bill Murray fight to survive in a new world order controlled by monsters. And obviously, like with this like Uncle Sam zombie thing here, the idea is like each one of the world powers has become infected by some kind of like basically like has been dethroned and usurped by a different type of monster. And it's my way of kind of like poking fun at the geopolitical landscape that we're in right now. But also a little fun kind of like twist on it. And it's my way of also making commentary on literary trends is that one of these world powers set off an EMP in North America. And so at some point, all of the libraries that were like archiving their stuff digitally, like basically all the world's like major institutional like knowledge bases just got wiped out, and so the, like stuff like medical knowledge and stuff has just been eradicated. And so a lot of the sciences have like regressed to like medieval. So I just feel like none of this might actually make any literal sense, but it was a nice way of like just creating a really fun sci-fi fantasy world and just being able to play around with it. And so I feel like every Monday I'm going to commit to putting out another like flash fiction episode. And we'll see where it takes me. But that again, that's White Devil. It's one word, just to simplify the URL. And you can look that up on Tapas, and hopefully next week I'll have another episode for you.
Oh, nice, cool. So we can expect updates each week. That'll be cool. We'll put that.
Yeah. I'll advertise the next episode weekly, and that'll be fun.
Okay, nice. And I'll I said I was going to be at a convention, but I'm realizing I don't have enough info to officially.
To like make a plug.
So I should probably do that next week. But expect news on me tabling and giving a presentation somewhere if you're in the Southwest Florida area. I'll be around. So yeah, and also have some exclusive stuff that isn't going to be available until I launch my campaign for book 2, which will be neat. So the first place you can get it is going to be at this particular convention, which will be neat. So
sounds good to me.
Yeah, so I guess that's episode 2. That'll be a wrap for Strider Talk. So thanks everyone for hanging out with us. Thanks for checking us out, whether it's live or in the replay. Appreciate you coming by. Give us a like and a subscribe. Let your friends know what we're doing here. Talking about storytelling. John here is he writes fiction. He writes a lot of things. He's a marketing strategist too, I guess. He knows, and he's a deep thinker. And I'm trying to draw and write comics. And we're trying to talk about the deep things of life and how to, I guess, sift through them narratively.
Yes.
Yeah.
I second all of that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so that's the show. So thanks for dropping by, and we'll talk to you guys later.
All right. Bye-bye.